Yuan Bo is the latest addition to the Cathayan roster, and he's all about statecraft, making the most of the Xing compass, and capitalizing on disharmony. But how does all of this work out in the gameplay? Well, let's dive right in and find out. In Yuan Bo's campaign, he makes use of the exact same caravans as the other two Cathayan lords, but aside from that, he has a totally new set of mechanics. First up, Matters of State. Matters of State is the mechanic which is totally unique to him and allows various actions of steel and stone to aid his armies, settlements, and more. Each side has a large number of actions which can be performed at any time at the cost of tokens. These actions range from reducing the recruitment time for a single army, purging corruption and reducing control to zero, all the way to loaning armies from factions, siphoning their income, resetting army movement range, and all the way at the end, changing all units in an army to yin and yang for maximum harmony, and choosing from 4 bonuses to place in your faction for 10 turns. You can choose to pledge to one of 4 areas, buffing warfare, diplomacy and trade, research and XP, or income and growth. You start the game with 2 of each tokens, and earning more can be very confusing, but I promise you it's fairly straightforward. Each time you spend some, instead of being consumed and restored over time, they are converted to the opposite type and then restored over time. For example, if we use Levy the Provinces, we consume our 2 steel and convert them to stone capacity. Capacity is then replenished 1 every 5 turns, but every time you win a battle, this goes down by 1 turn. You can increase your capacity for either side by creating fortress cities and commercial districts. This is done via the associated actions in the Matters of State menu and costs 4 steel or stone respectively. You must use these actions on tier 3 or larger province capitals, and the provinces gain bonuses depending on their designation. Fortress cities gain improvements to all military and defense buildings, granting faction-wide bonuses to units, improvements to recruitment, and units recruited locally, and much improved local defensive supplies. Commercial cities gain improvements to all of the resource and infrastructure buildings in the form of faction-wide bonuses to pretty much everything depending on the building. Construction cost reduction, recruit rank, replenishment rate, and better cargo trading are just naming a few. And again, a lot of these are faction-wide, so pretty top tier. The best advice I can give you for this mechanic is to just use it on cooldown and grind the settlement upgrades as fast as you can to increase more capacity to get better and more available actions. I didn't understand this when I played and wasted like 30 turns waiting for more capacity. Just use the actions when you get into the game and the progress will come at a steady rate. Next up we have the Xing compass. The compass has totally been expanded for Yuan, with 4 more directions being available, but only once he's captured some specific settlements, built some specific buildings, and defended them during a ritual similar to the Wood Elves. Along the top of the screen you have these 4 new icons, and each of these represents one of the new compass directions. Hovering over each one will show you the settlements you must capture to start the unlocking process. Once the settlements are under your control, you'll need to build these expensive landmark buildings, and once they're completed, lizardmen incursions will appear and attempt to destroy the settlement to prevent the ritual you just automatically started upon completing that building. These incursions are moderately sized armies, so make sure you have a fairly beefy one of your own before completing the landmarks, as the last thing you want is losing all your many turns of progress and being sent straight back to go with a lot less than $200. What they don't tell you is that owning these settlements at all apparently creates a bat signal of sorts, causing pretty much every enemy faction nearby to rush and sometimes outright teleport to the settlement to attempt to slow you down. If you want to see me have an actual mental breakdown when this happens to me, then be sure to subscribe to the campaigns channel linked below, where I'll be releasing short playthroughs for each of the new lords. Anyway, 5 turns after completing the landmark building, assuming that you defended against all incursions, the new compass directions will be unlocked. They each focus on a specific part of the game, just like the vanilla ones. Non-Chang is all about growth, Asher grants you winds of magic manipulation from Xing, Dragon River is all about protecting your armies and characters, and Broken Lands is all about XP. Once all directions are unlocked, the Battle of the Jade Compass will become available, which must be completed to get the campaign victory in both Realms of Chaos and Immortal Empires. The final mechanic Yuan has access to is Harmony, and I know you're thinking all Cathay has this, but his version is much different. Instead of an overall faction harmony, Yuan's is split up by the provinces. Lords and heroes still have harmony, but it doesn't really affect anything outside of battles. Buildings, however, affect the harmony of a province, but having an imbalance is no longer really a bad thing. Going entirely into Yang will buff research and recruitment, and Yin will buff growth and control, whilst being in harmony instead buffs movement range, income, and upkeep. It is much simpler than the old system since there's no punishment for not being perfectly balanced, and the bonuses from the imbalance incentivize you to focus on Yin when you first gain a province, before moving either towards the middle or entirely Yang later on, making much more use of the building type switching along the way. Cathay end up being a stupidly rich faction later in the game, so giving them more options to burn a bit of money later on is not a bad thing if you ask me. Lastly, he has his faction and lord effects. Similar to the Hyles, any faction that he has trade agreements with, he gains vision over all of their lands, which is really useful for general map knowledge and even making more trade packs afterwards. The increased relations with Cathay will help facilitate more trade and eventual confederations in both campaigns. The more capitals you have, the faster research is, creating a bit of a snowball later on, and extra capacity for Astromancers is always good since they're great heroes. As for his army, extra magic reserve capacity is never a bad thing for modern magic in battles, and the upkeep reductions for Chroman and Line units will help you out both early and later on, though, as I said, Cathay will be plenty rich without them. As for expansion, in his campaigns it really comes down to two things. Controlling all of Cathay, because why wouldn't you, and taking control of all the compass direction settlements. In Realms, taking control of Cathay is fairly simple, since everything starts there, and over time you'll gain higher and higher relations until you can confederate everyone who isn't a rebel lord. The compass locations are a little bit more challenging. 2 of them are in Cathay, so long as you take and defend them with your life, you should be just fine. The other 2 are fighting to the south, through the Mountains of Morn and into Chaos Dwarf territory. You'll be able to make friends with most ogres eventually and get safe passage to the south, but the Chaos Dwarves will require some alternate persuasion. My best advice would be to take a couple of the best armies you can and send them to take the settlements one at a time, leaving one army behind to man the Great Bastion and any other threats that show up within Cathay. It might seem excessive, but there are a lot of threats out there. Plus, Cathay get rich as hell, so you should easily be able to afford it. In Immortal Empires, it's a little bit more complicated. Yuan has been blessed with the accursed dual start, with himself starting in the Isle of the Crimson Skull, while still owning Shangwu over in Cathay in a province owned by the vampires, with no starting army there to defend it. Now, that being said, all the new compass direction settlements have been moved to Lustra, so technically you don't need to ever set foot in Cathay if you don't want to. But for financial reasons, I would suggest that you do, since it'll be far easier to gain and maintain control over there than it is in the jungles. You do get the option to relinquish control of your Cathayan region, so if you're on a less split campaign, that is a good option, but you'll be basically alone for the entire campaign with no backup income to fuel your Lustrian conquest, so it's not without downsides. My best advice would be to get in control of your starting province in Lustra, whilst holding on to Cathay as best you can with growth, defense and control buildings. The Crackdown Stone action will come in really useful here, so use that if you really need to keep it under control, as well as progress towards your first fortress here. Build recruitment buildings in Lustra, and as soon as you can afford a second army with some half-decent units, send it to Cathay via the Blue Sea Lanes and take control of your one Cathayan province, whilst preserving the army as much as you can. Once both areas are under some form of control, focus on trade and diplomacy with other Cathayan factions nearby, and expansion in Lustra. Ideally, you get others on side for trade and possible confederation, and gain control of Cathay through those methods, with minimal fighting aside from clearing out other factions and rebels. With all the income you produce in Cathay, you'll basically be able to burn money in Lustra with armies, expansion and general conquest in your search for the compass locations. Same as before, make sure you defend them well until they're totally completed, and have great garrisons to ensure you don't lose any progress, and you should get that dub eventually. And that is just about everything you need to know to play Yuan Bo in campaign, and just like the Changeling, we'll have the battle video coming out late today, so chances are it's already out by the time you're watching this. Let me know what you think of Yuan Bo and his mechanics in the comments below, like, subscribe, and if you want to know how to play the Changeling in the campaign, then check out this video to learn all about his new mechanics like cults and shapeshifting.